Welcome back to another episode of Behind the VR Headset. Today we have Christian, who is the developer of Alien Dawn. How you doing, Christian?
I'm doing very well, Serge. Thank you for having me to your lovely studio and decorating it in all this Alien Dawn gear over here. It's fantastic. Thank you.
My pleasure, sir. Thank you for giving me access to the game, and we did play together. We'll get into that a bit later on. We did a nice little stream. It's available on VR and you can play on PC as well, which is awesome. So you can play with anyone.
That's correct.
And tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and where you're from.
I am from Palm Springs, California. And I started my career as a filmmaker, and so I always had a passion for storytelling, visual effects. I had a YouTube channel that was kind of like one of those channels where it was like we would do these like 3-4 minute sketch comedy pieces about video games usually. And speaking of video games, I always had a passion for them, just playing them from childhood. But I actually got into the modding scene as a kid, like in middle school, making like Wolfenstein mods and Quake mods. But as I kind of like got into my 20s or whatever, I stopped doing that and went full time into filmmaking. Mm-hmm. But around 2013, I got a demo at E3 of the Oculus DK1, which was like the first developer kit. And I was just completely blown away by the experience, as many people are. You immediately start thinking like, what if you did this in VR, and what if you did that, right? And it was literally in that moment, I'm like, I'm switching careers or whatever, because I was getting a little bored of like the filmmaking stuff, because I had this thought where I was like, I don't think there's going to be a camera angle or editing style that I'm going to invent that's going to be anything different that has been done already for the last 110 years or whatever, right? Like, not to say that there's always going to be like some great new music and great new movies and all that stuff, but I just really wanted to be a part of something in the beginning, and I saw VR as the opportunity to do that. So in 2015, I taught myself how to develop in the Unreal Engine. And within 3 months, I had a prototype of this thing called Stonehenge VR, and it was a tour of Stonehenge, a virtual VR tour of Stonehenge, and it really kind of took off, like bizarrely fast, like which is really strange with it having been the first thing that I made in 3 months. It ended up becoming a museum exhibit. In 2 different museums in the United States. And so Voyager VR was created for that. We did several educational things. And I can go into more further in the interview, but that was kind of how I got started in VR.
Nice. I did see Stonehenge a while back. I haven't actually played it, but I know. What year was that? 2016, was it?
2016 was, that was when we both released. What's funny is it started from very humble beginnings, because I was literally creating it in my bedroom or whatever. I didn't even have a Steam account, so I set up a Squarespace website, and I charged people $4.99 for access to my Dropbox, and so they would just download RAR files of the super early version of Stonehenge back in March of 2016. But by the end of 2016, it became a launch title on Viveport. And we were actually a part of like their marketing campaign when Vive launched their own software platform. And we had a little partnership with them when they launched Viveport. And so that was like amazing to see Stonehenge on the cover of like CNET.com, and like all these, various like news outlets that I grew up like reading, like to see our stuff on there was amazing. So it was a really very quick, very, very, roller coaster ride in the beginning.
Sounds really cool, mate. I think with regards to the Stonehenge game, what was the development time with that? How long did that take you to make?
So it was, I say 3 months, and that was almost from like doing my first Unreal tutorial. Then about a month and a half into that, I was like, I think I can build something. And so I modeled all the rocks of Stonehenge in Maya, put some textures on them, tossed them in a big landscape world in Unreal. And I think, within like 2 months, I had this thing where you could like just walk around and nothing happened. It was just the monument.
Yeah.
I had the monument, and then I started adding in these little pods that you would go to that would have different bits of educational information, but also very kind of inspirational information about the monument. And basically, kind of like the message behind the whole thing was at the end of it was that it's we still barely kind of know how the thing was built. And it's amazing what these people were able to do, 5,000 years ago. I think that's what it was. It's been a while since I made this thing. And these humans were able to do something that we still can't really figure out how they did it. And we're a part of that, right? Like, and you can do that same thing today. You could do something awesome today that maybe 5,000 years from now people won't even know how you did it, and I just trying to bring a little inspiration to the educational side of it, right? And so I have many other theories about how VR could be very important to education, but I won't go into all that now. But basically, so then I would say within 3 months I had that first prototype. And then, which was like the very basic tour, and that was all done on a DK2, and you used like an Xbox controller to move around. And then we were lucky enough to get a Vive Pre in May of 2016, so that would have been about 6 months later. And that had the full motion controllers, and you could, like the full room scale, right? And the second I tried that, I was like, oh my God, like this is changing everything. So I was like, so I had to port it to that, and had that up and running in a couple weeks, I think. And at that point, we decided, okay, because people they do it and they would start crying at the end of it. Right. Wow. Like they go through this experience. It was less than 10 minutes long, and they would cry. And what was really amazing about it, and you might even be able to speak to this because you're kind of from near that area, right? People that grew up near it, they always go like, "Oh, it's so boring," like you go there and it's just really not that great, whatever.
Yeah.
And they go, and right. And so many people that had been to it or lived near it or whatever, they would go through the experience and they'd say like, I grew up near this thing my whole life, and I never really cared much about it, but this gave me a whole new way of looking at it. And again, like I said, some of them would have these really like emotional reactions to it. So I was like, okay, I think we have something here. And so I called up my sister who lives in Seattle, and she introduced us to the Pacific Science Center, which is a pretty big museum out in Seattle. And we took it there and we demoed it to them, and they immediately wanted it. And so, within a couple months, we installed it in there. And then after that, that's about 9 months into it, HTC got in touch with us. And they wanted software for the launch of Viveport, and they chose Stonehenge to be one of those launch titles. And so then that was to make it kind of a home version, if you will. That was probably another, I guess, 4 months of development, and then that released like right at the end of 2016. So it literally was like from the time I started learning Unreal to almost exactly a year later it launched.
That's an amazing journey, like in just a year as well. And you kind of self-taught, and it was really popular with museums and definitely people that played it. So how did it come about with the experience actually getting into museums and stuff like that? Did they approach you, or was it something you looked for? How did that come about?
Yeah, okay, yeah. So the series of steps were, as I mentioned, I had released the game on Squarespace, on my Squarespace website, with the RAR zip file or compressed file downloads.
Yeah.
And then at the same time that I was selling it online, I also took it down to my hometown and I demoed it to my computer teacher's computer class that I had in high school. And while I was there, I thought it would be cool if we had the local news come by and do a story on what I had created. And so I went to give this lecture at the high school about Stonehenge VR, and I gave a demo of VR. I mean, at the time, VR was still like really new, you know, even then. But the other part of the story is not just that I was there demoing it at like my high school or whatever, but somebody had this guy named Curtis had downloaded the Stonehenge VR alpha off of the website, and he had showed it to his father, who had cancer, and he had always wanted to go to Stonehenge and never was able to. And through the app that I created and was selling on this website, he found it, downloaded it, gave a demo to his father, and they both had this kind of like emotional moment where, you know, again, they cried, and it was like this really special thing for them that he got to do that. And he wrote me an email about it. And so that is what the news anchor came down to cover, was that story.
Right, okay.
Right. So it was like, and so it was like, what, like how this technology can kind of impact people in a positive way. And so after that news story came out, that's when I called my older sister, who's always been a very big supporter of mine. And she lives in the Seattle area and, you know, works with a lot of people out there. And I was like, hey, listen, like I made this thing. I think it's like having an impact on people. Like people are going into it, they're crying, they're having this amazing experience. What do you think we could do with it? And she's like, well, let me call around. Let me call, you know, my network around here or whatever. And that led us through a series of, you know, some of her very nice friends getting us a meeting at the Pacific Science Center. And I drove a Honda CRV packed full of computer equipment up there. And you know, unloaded it into the museum and gave them a demo, and they wanted it instantly, and they wanted it instantly because they had never done VR before.
Yeah.
Right. So they're like blown away by not only, I think, like, you know, I'll take some credit for the story and what I designed, but obviously just the fact that, you know, they're seeing VR for the first time. They're going, oh my God, of course we need this in the museum or whatever. Right. And so I think that sort of speaks to like part of my philosophy and like wanting to get into it when I did, because I knew that if I waited too long, it wasn't going to work out the way it did. Because like if you took a VR headset to a museum now, they'd be like, dude, we got like 10 of those in the back.
Yeah.
You know, so that was why I worked so hard in the beginning to get it going.
That's amazing. Like with the guy that, he's experienced with his dad as well, and the way the museum was just like, we want it straight away. Because that's what I was like when I first. Oh, I mean, I already had the PSVR, but I saw it and I thought, I think that's going to be great. So I went and bought it straight away. And then as soon as I put it on, the experience is a lot of emotions, isn't it, when you first try VR? But then if it's something like you were saying that his father always wanted to go to Stonehenge, that's amazing. That's a really cool story.
Oh yeah, no, it absolutely was. I mean, it was freaking. It was amazing, and no, very fortunate that it played out the way I did. I'm thankful for all those people, like kind of along the way that led to us being able to do what we did with Stonehenge and Voyager, and I still think there's just so much opportunity to do things like that for people with this technology, and I hope we get to do more.
So with Alien Dawn, did you decide to make that game straight away after you made Stonehenge, or was it a few years that you had a bit of a gap? Did you make like a game between Stonehenge and Alien Dawn, or were you just kind of honing your skills and learning more about development?
Yeah, I love that question. So there was a gap in between Stonehenge and then Alien Dawn,
right?
And basically, after we got the Stonehenge in the second museum, obviously, as I mentioned, the original aspiration and design was never to be in museums, but it ended up happening. Yeah. And we thought, you know what, let's keep this going. Let's expand. Let's make more experiences. We had plans to do all kinds of, different, the pyramids and, whatever monument you can think of. But it was still very difficult at that time to get funding, especially for stuff like education, yes. Sadly. And so even though we had, many grand plans and business plans and, all this kind of stuff to kind of, make this educational software company, it sadly didn't work out. And around the time that was sort of coming to an end, we had gone to my partner and I, and Jessica, we had gone to a VR party in LA. It was like a VR meetup. Mm-hmm. And we overheard somebody talking about how they, like, at the other table, Jessica overheard this person saying, "Oh, I really need a developer to make a zombie game." And Jessica turned around and was like, "I can do that for you." and so this guy gave Jessica his business card, and we ended up calling them, and they were a VR arcade company, kind of similar to Holodeck. I'm not sure if you're familiar. Okay, yes, yeah. So, yeah, it was very much a Holodeck type. It was literally, it literally looked identical to it with the scaffolding and all that stuff. And they were looking for a developer to make a game for them. And ultimately, it ended up not being a zombie game. It ended up being this time travel game, kind of a family-friendly, cartoony, like almost like Overwatch-looking characters. And it was a time machine game where you go back in time and you fight kind of like interdimensional monsters or prehistoric monsters and that kind of thing. And so for 2 years we worked on this arcade game, and it was a four-player VR arcade game, and we finished it, and we installed it in there's an arcade out here in LA called 2-Bit Circus.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, 2-Bit Circus. It's actually run by the Bushnell family, which are the people that Nolan Bushnell is the guy that created Pong, and so his family started this arcade, this VR arcade in LA, and so we had it installed there for a short period, and then we also had it installed in Boomers, which is kind of like a Dave and Buster's, like a family fun center where you mini golf and that kind of thing. And so right as we were installing these arcade games in all of these arcade family fun centers, COVID happened.
Yeah.
And instantly everything was done. Yeah. It was done. Like the company that we got hired to make the game, we were commissioned to make the game. They were just like, nobody's taking calls about this stuff anymore. And I mean, listen, I wouldn't blame any business that didn't want to have VR headsets in their establishment during a pandemic, because you're literally putting these headsets on your face when everybody's like afraid to even touch anything.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, obviously, of course, that affected, the whole world, but like in particular, this one was like really specifically quite effective because you're literally putting this thing on your face. And so so that business it was just gone basically, like I would say literally overnight.
So the game never saw the light of day.
No, exactly. No one's ever seen it except for like some test audiences.
Are you allowed to say the name of the game?
Yeah, it was called. Well, it had a few names over the years or whatever, but like I think eventually they just decided on VR Time Machine, which I personally did not like.
It's not, it's not very original.
No.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. So we had our own name for it that we would have preferred. I'm not even going to say it right now because it's like maybe we might use it at another time.
You
or
never
whatever.
know. Yeah.
But yeah, gosh, if I had my way, I'd love to take what we had designed, because it was a really cool. I loved the characters that we made for this arcade game, and make it something, So maybe that might happen someday. But yeah, so it was a project that was finished, installed, and then literally no one ever got to see it. So.
Wow.
Yeah. You can see if you go to VoyagerVR.com, you can see like screenshots and trailers of it.
Oh, awesome! Yeah, I'll link that down in the description. Yeah, so everyone can check that out. I'm actually interested to see what that was like. And is it?
Yeah. And just real quick, the guy, obviously I mentioned, the title I didn't like or whatever, but the opportunity that the guys that ran that company, that they gave us to literally create an arcade game from scratch when we had never made a game, let alone a multiplayer one. That was literally the first game we ever made. And for them to give us that opportunity was really cool, and we're still grateful for that. Yeah,
it would be great if one day you could go back to it, but I don't know the ins and outs, but that'd be awesome if you could finish off that, get that out there. Was there anything else after that, or was it, you told me before you mentioned that it was during the pandemic, that's when you started making Alien Dawn?
Yeah. So we did do. I'm gonna drink my goddamn water again. I hope I'm not annoying you.
That's fine. Better than last time. At least it's water.
At least it's water. Let's not talk about last time.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
Listen. I'm not the one that took me on a party for 3 hours. Okay.
Maybe some snippets at the end of this.
Yeah. The lost footage.
Oh god,
that's the Voyager VR interview. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So there was some stuff. Okay, so in terms of in between the arcade game and Alien Dawn, We also did a lot of work for television companies and movie companies out in Los Angeles.
Yes.
And so we would basically do kind of like this freelance work where we would create set designs for television shows for pitches. And that came as a result from my career prior to VR, where I worked as a producer and editor and director, creating essentially pilots for television shows to sell
That's
them
so
to
cool. Yeah.
Oh,
So
thank you.
to Netflix.
No, yeah. I don't know if it was ever to Netflix. There was some
okay.
to E, NBC. I mean, I think it might have been. It might have been at one point. But this was in around 2013, so Netflix was still sort of new at that point, I guess.
Yeah.
It wasn't how it is now. But anyway, so I would direct these pilots and sales reels essentially to sell television shows. And so then when we started doing the VR stuff, we went to those same studios and we're like, hey, like we can actually do all this 3D stuff now. And so we did a lot of that work. That would kind of like help us pay bills sometimes, where it's like, we would literally design stuff like this, right? Like where it's like, it'd be like a stage for some game show or something like that. So we did a little bit of that. And then finally, the last thing I'll mention before Alien Dawn is we did this really cool project for a charity event with IBM, where we took their image recognition technology, which they call Watson, and we created an AR scavenger hunt for this Christmas festival, where you would take this tablet around, and it was all designed in Unreal, and you would take a photo of like these ornaments like real world ornaments on a tree, and then it would send that data of the photo to IBM, and IBM servers would tell our program in Unreal, like, oh yeah, they took the correct photo of Santa or the snowman or whatever, right. And that would trigger the next kind of event in the story. And it was really kind of a fun, really fun experience, different. And so we've done a little bit of AR work as well, even though the company is called Voyager VR. You can also see that on VoyagerVR.com. And so, yeah, so then as all that kind of was happening, the arcade game, the IBM thing, we really started to want to do kind of our own thing again, because it had been years now at this point, 3 years, I think, since we had done Stonehenge. And it was like, we want to make something of our own. And it's like, okay, what is that going to be? And through a series of events and choices, we decided to make Alien Dawn.
And what was your inspiration for the game?
Yeah, so the initial seed of the idea came from playing DayZ, and the game DayZ itself, obviously it's like a mega hit, right?
Yes.
But with that game, you sort of get to a point where there's only so much like you can do with it, right? Like after you've kind of like, played it. I mean, I have probably 1,000 hours in it or whatever, but like it still starts to like, you start to run out of things to do. And at one point I called my friend up who was running we had our own server, and I was like, hey, what do you think it would take to like make our own mods, for DayZ or whatever? Because I wanted to like add things. I wanted to make it more what I wanted it to be.
Yes.
And, he was like, we could do this, this, and this, and this, whatever. And I was about to do that. And then I like thought to myself, I'm like, wait a second. I know how to make my own games now. Why would I make a mod when I could make my own game or whatever, right? And so that was like, I think the initial, the people always give this advice, like, if you like do what you would do for fun and try to do that as work, right?
Yes.
And I was about to make a mod for DayZ for nothing, just for fun or whatever. And it's like, well, why not make that my job, And And so then it was like, obviously having the VR experience, we could not just make like a Daisy clone, but give it its own thing, you know, really make it its own thing. It's something you can't do in these other survival games, like have it be in VR. You know, obviously we have our own modes and our own way of doing things as well. But that was kind of where like the initial seed of inspiration came from. But I'll also say this, like, I know that from doing projects for over 20 years now, that when you make a decision to do something, it consumes your life, and it consumes years of your life. Even when, you know, like I did a movie back in 2006, this short film called How to Be Emo. And I thought it was going to take like 3 months to make or whatever. Yeah. And it ended up taking 2 years.
Wow. How long was it?
It's 20 minutes.
Okay.
It was a 20-minute black and white short film. And that was the viral video that got millions of views back in 2006.
Okay. Yeah.
And but point of the story, my point is that I thought it was going to take 3 months. It took 2 years to make, right? Then it went viral. Then all of a sudden, people found out about it, and now I'm going around to studios and pitching like feature film versions of How to Be Emo, and I'm writing feature film scripts about How to Be Emo, and I'm like dedicating my life to try to make this, like, take this short viral video to like the next level and make that my career or whatever, right? And by the end of it, I probably spent 5 years.
Wow.
You know, if you really take, like, you know, whatever, right? And so it's like this one random joke of an idea took 5 years of my life, right? And so now when I'm trying to think of, okay, what am I going to do? I really, you know, you don't want to overthink things, but you also need to be conscious that it's like, if you want to do something right, like, you're going to invest a lot of time. I'm sure you know, right? Like from doing stuff like what you're doing here.
Mm-hmm. Yes. It's not as, I mean, editing a YouTube video doesn't take that long. It does and it doesn't, but like your project was, I know it was 20 minutes in the end, but that sounds like a lot of work over the 2 years.
It was, yeah. If you watch it, it's pretty ambitious for, you know, something that was done on like no budget and you know, back in the, you know, very, you know, it was made pre-YouTube, you know, so
yeah.
You know, it was limited resources, you know, there wasn't stock photos and, you know, all that kind of, you know, not a lot. There wasn't a lot. You had to make everything yourself essentially. Mm-hmm. And so, anyways, so when it came time to decide, like, are we really going to make Alien Dawn or whatever, there had to be more than just a reason than like, oh, I think it would be fun to do, right? Like, that's a part of it. Yeah. But ultimately, the reason that we decided to make it was because of the AI camera idea.
Yes, the Voyager camera. We can go into that a bit more. I think it'd probably be best if you kind of let everyone who's watching know about the gameplay loop of Alien Dawn and what it's about.
Yeah, absolutely. So the gameplay loop of Alien Dawn is, well, it really stems from wanting to, and this isn't the gameplay loop, but just the general concept. It stems from wanting to create something that a large group of people can all play together and have fun, whether they're in VR or on desktop and eventually, hopefully, consoles. Basically, what we kind of realized is that in our group of friends on Discord, you know, we have up to, you know, 10 people in one voice chat room at a time. And when you look at the catalog of games in general that support 10 people, mm-hmm. It's very small. Yeah. I mean, I don't know the number, but in comparison to other multiplayer games, I would say it's a fraction, you know, maybe 5%, something like that. And so either you find a game that can support 10 people or more or whatever, or everybody has to splinter off into these separate groups and play 3, 4, whatever. And my belief is that those groups I believe that that's going to become more and more common the more and more people are playing games and getting into these Discord channels and groups, and they're going to need experiences for that type of thing. And so what we're trying to design is basically that fun social party game experience that's got a little bit of hardcore nature to it, right? Like, you know, if you like something like an Onward or a Pavlov, you know, there might be a little bit of that for somebody. It's not quite as hardcore as that, right? But just to give you an idea of like that, the style of the game. But it's really meant for like you and 10 of your friends or whatever to jump in and just have a blast for like an hour and a half, shooting things and, you know, looting. And essentially the basic concept of it is that you crash land in the middle of this alien invasion. You're in this big open world map, and you and your friends basically have to find a map, get to a radio tower, call for extraction, get a flare gun, and then you go to the extraction point and you fire off the flare gun, helicopter comes and it picks you up and you escape. That's like the base like experience.
Yes.
And so obviously there's a lot of things that happen during that experience. There's a giant mothership that comes in from the sky, and it's like the size of a building, and it floats over you, and that can kill you. The aliens come in and they raise the dead out of the ground, which is an inspiration from a movie called Plan 9 from Outer Space, which is an Ed Wood movie from the 1960s. It's a very famous, iconic movie. It's considered by many to be the worst movie ever made. And I have seen people post about Alien Dawn saying it's the worst VR game ever made. And so I'm like, well, thank you so much, because it's actually exactly following the inspiration that we decided to follow when we created the game.
That's pretty funny, mate. That's pretty funny. We played together. We did a live stream. We did. I think we did a giveaway as well. And it was fun to play with yourself. And I know I had the game. I bought it like maybe a year before, and then I played it for a little bit, and then I remember mentioning to you that when I first started the game, I didn't follow it through as much because I was kind of confused of what to do. But it's kind of right there. It does tell you how to do it, but like, I remember we were speaking about it. Like, people just need their hands to be held in games, basically when it first starts, and then off the back of that, you did like a tutorial mode, didn't you? I gave that a go as well.
Yes, yeah. So everything that you're talking about is accurate, and excuse me. So everything that you just mentioned is accurate, and it kind of speaks to something that I think is very important and that I want people to know, anybody that is watching this and trying to understand my, I guess, framework of how I think about the development of our games and my games and Alien Dawn.
Yeah.
Is that I truly, truly, truly value the feedback of both the positive reviews and the negative reviews. Of course, the positive ones warm my heart and they make my day better. But
yes, of course, yeah.
The negative ones also teach me a lot. And I honestly, I don't know if the people that leave the I think there's some constructive ones, and then there's the ones that, like, you know, you can tell they're upset. And listen, I've been there too. I've been frustrated at games, and I'm like, you know, I want to leave a negative review. I get it, right? But I really wonder if they know how much it actually helps me understand, like, what's wrong with the game. And literally, I just got a negative review a couple days ago where this guy was like, every time you update the game, which we update the game a couple times a month, it has to reinstall the whole thing every time. And it takes forever on my computer. If you have like a relatively fast hard drive, it's not too bad, but it's still way longer than it should be. And that problem got worse over time as we started to add more content to the game. And so it's like, it was like one of those things where it's like, I didn't notice it because it progressively got worse. Right. And now the game, every time you update it, it reinstalls 20 gigs. Right. And, you know, depending on the speed of your internet, your computer, all this shit, it could be a hassle. And so literally from this negative comment a couple of days ago, I was like, okay, I got to freaking fix this. Like, that sucks. I don't want people having that experience.
Yeah.
And so what I realized is that there's some, not just, I figured out how to solve that problem, but it also showed me that there were some other fundamental issues with the code, the way the game was coded. And that part of it comes from just my learning on the way of doing it. Where it's like 2 years ago when I started, I didn't know the things I know now, where I'm like, oh, duh, like it should totally be done this way. So now I'm literally, because of this guy's negative comment, I'm going back in and I'm going like, oh, wow, no, this is the way it should be. And I think ultimately, like, the game is probably going to run better, it'll crash less, and it's not going to take as long to update. And that all came from a negative review. That was not very nice. Right. And so yeah, so I think it's just important for people. I want people to know that you know, it's like your contributions to in comments actually totally affects how this thing moves forward. And I can say the same for what you, I mean, you've literally seen going from 2 weeks ago playing with me, and you made this offhand comment. You're like, oh man, once we started cheating and I could just shoot whatever I wanted, I'm having a blast.
Yes.
And so I was like, okay, how do I do that? How do I make that for him? And so I added a mode where you can have unlimited ammo, and it's a little bit more guided, and hopefully that helps the barrier to entry to newer people. And I've already seen one comment of a person that really like loved it. So so you made one offhand comment, and like literally 2 weeks later, what you said is in the game.
Yeah, you literally kind of went under the radar for a couple of weeks, and then he was like, oh, I've made this, do you want to try this build out? And I gave it a go, and it definitely is a lot more guided. I mean, by that point, obviously we played together, so I knew everything, but then I looked at it from the perspective of someone who's never played, and it was going to make a hell of a difference with new players for sure, definitely. Because I was actually I was testing the game out yesterday, I think. So I did a live stream to a dev, and we were chatting on Discord, and I said, what's your biggest complaint? And he was like, he mentioned a couple of things, but he goes, the thing is, with people do refunds and stuff, they just say, they don't put any comments, or they say this game is trash or buggy and all that kind of stuff. So it's really important, guys, even if you don't like a game, try and leave the actual reason why you didn't like, you know, what was wrong with it. Otherwise developers are just not going to improve the game. So your feedback is really valuable.
No, thank you so much for mentioning that. Like, seriously, that's really cool. I mean, and to add on to that, I think that's really, really smart to say. And to add on to that, like, if one comment I get a lot, right, is is the graphics suck. This one guy said that it looked like an Amiga 500 game. So I was like, okay. I want to do some side-by-side comparisons of Alien Dawn and like an Amiga 500 game, and you know, we'll do some analysis on that, maybe for a separate YouTube video. But what I have trouble interpreting is if you say the graphics suck, right? What does that mean? Right, like, because that could mean a lot of things. Is it the resolution? Is it the game? You know, it's too pixelated. Are the textures blurry? Are the static meshes, like the models, not detailed enough? Is the lighting bad? Like, maybe it's all of it. I don't know. But if you just say the graphics, that doesn't. I don't know what that means. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and it's like, and I don't expect everybody to be able to break that down or whatever, but It would be. I'd love to know like what some of these people are referring to, because
Yeah.
I look at other VR games of similar genres, and I'm like, I don't really see. I personally, I mean, listen, I'm still gonna fucking, excuse me. Okay, I guess I can say fuck. I'm still
You can now. No, go on.
right. I'm still obsessively trying to make the game better, have better graphics, right? Like, regardless of what I'm saying right now, like that is it. I wouldn't say it's a top priority, because gameplay and stability is always probably, you know, top priority and fun. But graphics are really coming in near the top of the list because it gets mentioned so often. But I wonder, when I look at some, again, games in the same genre, and I'm like, I don't see the difference. Like, why does this game is bad graphics, or is not bad graphics, but ours is?
Yeah.
But I don't see a difference or whatever. Again, I'm still trying to improve it regardless. But the only thing that I can think of, and I'd love to hear your opinion, is that they're having fun in the other game and they're not having it in mine. Right? So maybe when they're not having fun or they're frustrated, they start to see all the imperfections, and then they go, "Oh, I'm not having fun. The graphics suck." Right?
Yes.
Versus a game where the graphics suck as well, or whatever.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
But they're having fun, and they don't notice, you know, right?
Yeah, they kind of, yeah. I mean, I'd let things slide a bit if the graphics weren't all that, but the gameplay was really fun. You have actually, you did an update for the lighting, haven't you? And then you did mention something about Unreal 5, I think it was. Is that right?
Yeah, that is correct. So I did do another pass on the lighting for the main open world level, which I think has improved it.
Yeah, it has, definitely. Yes.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it definitely has.
Thank you. Yeah, it sounds like you played it just a couple days ago, so you would have seen that. Yeah, the light comes through like way more now. It just makes the whole world like kind of warmer and a bit brighter. Like, it was just really kind of drab and muted, and not in a good, scary way, just kind of a bland way. And so I should also mention that so much of that like comes from, you know, just trying to get the performance right and having to dial everything back. You know, it's like what I think is interesting, and I think I'm gonna make a YouTube video about this, is I have a way of showing what Alien Dawn looks like through, basically, I could play in VR, but I can show what it looks like through the desktop version.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks like a completely different game, right? And so it's like, that is right now, it's with the limitations of basically Unreal 4, it's very difficult to get the game to look like the desktop version, because a lot of the features that make the game look good aren't supported in Unreal 4 in the same way. Now, that's not to say you can't make something gorgeous with it or whatever, but to try to do what we're trying to do with an open world, it's a little bit more difficult.
Yeah.
And so that is why the next step, because when I imagine the game, in my head, it's always been, I wouldn't say photoreal by any means, but like it's always had like a really like very cool like cinematic look to it. Like, I've never thought of it as cartoony or anything like that, and that's what I'd like it to ultimately be. And so I've already started the process of porting it over to Unreal 5.1, and I do believe that that is going to allow me to crank up the resolution, increase the various like post-processing filters and effects, and just overall like make the game look, I would say, markedly different from what you would experience if you bought the game today. You know, of course, I'm not promising anything, right? Like I'm just explaining like where I'm at in the development process.
Yes.
But I am confident about it, and I'm excited to hopefully show people that we can make it really cool.
So you've started that process already. Have you noticed anything? I mean, obviously you have, but what are the main things that you've noticed from moving to Unreal 5.1 from the current engine?
I think what happened with Unreal 4 and then the VR support is that they started making Unreal 5, right? And all the new features and compatibility for creating more high fidelity experiences are kind of on this other side of this river that is Unreal 5.
Right, okay.
And basically, okay. And so it's like, I know that there are just features that I can't enable in Unreal 4, but I can in Unreal 5. And the limited experience that I have in it is that it does look a lot better and overall just performs better. But I also know that there's still a lot that I can do on my own, like that just of the code that already exists that will continue to improve it. Like you can't just rely on like, oh, I'm going to click this button in Unreal 5 and it's going to solve everything, you know?
Yeah. That's my real question. That's just joking. If only it was that easy, right? That'd be great.
The legendary make it cool button. Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's an element of that, but there's still going to be a lot of work that goes into it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So when we streamed, we used the Voyager cam. So in the bottom corner, we had the Voyager cam. And do you want to explain what that is? I think you'd probably be able to explain it a lot better than me.
Okay. Yeah. So as I mentioned previously, I think when choosing to commit to a project, knowing that, okay, if I do this, it's probably going to take several years of my life to do.
Yeah.
It should have some meaning behind it, right? Like, it's like, I'm not just trying to make a Me Too copycat zombie game. There needs to be something else, some kind of substance to it. That being said, I mean, I still think that like our philosophies of like the large group multiplayer and what some of the things we're designing within the game itself are worthy of it in its own. But really, like what sealed the deal in terms of committing to do Alien Dawn was this concept of the Voyager AI camera. And this came about from a series of events throughout my life and career of working in film as a storyteller, creating these short films about video games where if you watch, so I made a movie called Apocalypse Daisy.
Okay.
And it's got a very very kind of cinematic feel to it. It's a parody of Apocalypse Now, if anybody's ever seen that film, which is like one of the best movies ever made.
Yeah, if you haven't seen Apocalypse Now, then God help you. It's brilliant. I love that. Yeah.
Oh, good. I'm glad you like. Yeah. No, it's the movie is immaculate from every aspect, from like the music to the sound to the camera angles to the acting to the characters. It's just a perfect movie, basically. And so I decided to make this like a parody of both the game DayZ and Apocalypse Now, and kind of combine that into one kind of funny movie. But anyway, point is that you'll see that it's shot fairly cinematically, like a movie. And so I have that background and that passion. And then at the same time, I had started another show around that same time in 2014 called Best Game Show Ever, which was another YouTube show. You can look that up. We did a bunch of fun VR stuff back with like the DK1 and the DK2. And one of the things that we discovered while making that show is we would put our friends, who were like fellow YouTubers kind of thing, into these horror VR experiences. Like, did you ever play Dread Halls?
No. I haven't. It's been on my radar for a long time though. Yeah.
Yeah, so Dread Halls was like one of the first like horror experiences for like the early VR stuff. And it, relatively kind of simple graphics or whatever, but it was the most terrifying experience, right? Like we would, we'd put our friends in this headset and they would be yelling and screaming and just like literally like sweating afterwards. And so we would film them doing this Dread Halls and some other stuff. And it was like, I had never seen people react that way to a video game, right? Like you see people, like maybe they rage, quit, and throw their mouse or something or whatever, like, or they get excited because they got a chicken dinner in PUBG or something, like there's that kind of emotion.
Yeah.
But I'd never seen someone legitimately freaking like terrified, like, and so predictably.
Yeah.
And so what we would do is we would make these little stories about their experience going through these games, these early VR games. And I was like, wow, okay, wait a second. What if I took all my cinema storytelling experience making movies, then mixed it with filming the live reactions of players in VR that are truly having like an emotional reaction, almost like they're on like a reality television show or something,
Yeah.
Or like they're truly characters in a movie running away from the axe murderer or whatever, because that's how it feels. It really feels like that's happening. So mix that, and then later my knowledge of VR development, and combine all three of those things into Alien Dawn and the Voyager AI camera, where you and your friends are not only going through this experience and having fun together, but this camera that I programmed to film you like you're being filmed by a real movie studio or director, and it creates this, like, essentially this cinematic story of your experience trying to escape this alien invasion that you and your friends can then watch after you play. So that is why we decided to make Alien Dawn and committed to doing it and make the AI camera was really to create this new type of experience. And then coming from the streamer background, it also can potentially be a tool for streamers, because now instead of having to edit your own content, this camera theoretically would do it for you.
Yeah.
And I think it could give a better experience for the players, a better experience for streamers, and a better experience for the audience watching on Twitch or Justin TV or Real Player, whatever streamer service that you might be streaming on.
Yeah, I think it worked. It works really well. We did have some. I watched the footage back as well. We had some really funny moments, and that camera caught them quite well, because it was definitely really good fun. There was only two. There was us two, but like you said, you can have more people on there. So say another 8 people playing on VR or PC. I think that camera's a brilliant addition, and it follows the host of the camera, doesn't it?
So it functions in 2 different ways.
Okay.
There's a version of the camera, and this is included in the game right now.
Okay.
There's a version of the camera that will run on the host. It'll run on who's ever hosting the server, and that the camera will follow the host specifically around his area. It'll still film other people as long as they're near that person.
Right. Yeah.
If you run a dedicated server, the camera can actually fly around all over the map. So it could, like, say, one of your friends is on the other side of the map. It could literally cut to a mile away, film them for a little while, come back to you, and that's really where I think it would be exciting, where you start to see like multiple squads, all doing different things, and it's like cutting back and forth between them, and I think right now, like, the implementation of it is, it's in its very early stages. I mean, it's definitely something that, like, I think is helpful and useful and better than not having it, but there's still so much more that can be done, right? But that's like the ultimate vision, is that, like, it's cutting around this big open world to many different groups.
Yeah, there are videos out there with that kind of footage though that you've released, because I've seen them. Because I watched loads of videos of the games before I actually bought it, and it just looks really cool. It looks really cool. Everyone's doing different things, and it just goes to all the different groups. It's a great idea. I don't know how long it took to actually kind of program that camera to do what it does, but it seems like it might have taken a bit of time.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's kind of hilarious. Like, I always joke with Jessica about this in terms of, like, like the work that has gone into this, is that it's like we've created an open world multiplayer VR game to make this camera.
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of the hilarious part to me, is that it's like learning how to do all this other stuff to actually do this other thing, right? Not that I didn't have passion to make the game, but it's like, oh man, I just find that really funny. But yeah, the camera itself, I would say I've probably spent about, maybe I would say generously, like 15 to 20% of my development time on the camera, and the other 80 on the game, because essentially, like, the philosophy has been, if the game isn't fun and the people aren't having a good time, or there's bugs and it's broken, who cares what the camera's filming?
Yeah.
Right. So a lot of it has been, let's get the game, it's been this, like, let's do a little bit of the camera, but we really got to fix these bugs because they're, in the game or whatever. So it's been a side-by-side development. But the game always comes first, because if the game's not functioning, again, there's no point in filming it. But I think about a year into our early access release, 2 years into development total, you could definitely see that it's come a long way, and that it's pretty usable. I mean, I wouldn't want to stream the game without it. I'll put it that way.
Yeah. And you mentioned the early access side of things. So do you have an idea of when you want to do a full release? Do you have an ETA or?
Yeah, so I think like a full release would probably be after the port to Unreal 5. So a port to Unreal 5, really getting like all the bugs out.
Yeah.
And getting the type of stuff that people expect out of a game, like, for instance, being like, we have a fairly decent amount of customizable controls, right? Like, you can switch between smooth and snap turn, that type of thing. But maybe, even being able to, like, I'd like people to be able to remap their buttons on the, the motion controllers, things like that, right? Like, so a lot of those just like quality of life things I think are necessary. I think there needs to be more maps, more playable more characters to choose from, more clothes. The AI needs a lot of like, the AI like functions enough for you to be able to, like, play the game, but I'd like the AI to be far more sophisticated. It really depends. I think there's one version of this where we take what we have, like with the escape mode, and we make that the best it could possibly be, and then launch that as like the official version.
Yeah.
Or we do that, but then also start to add in other modes as well. Because right now there isn't any persistent stuff. Like, there's no like, I'd love to have like a base building mechanic where you can go live in the world and
Yeah.
build bases and mine. I enjoy mining minerals out of freaking mountains and shit just as much as the next person.
Yeah.
And so like it'd be cool to have stuff like that, and there's no reason why we couldn't do that. And so that'll be that. I can't answer whether or not like that'll be a requirement for the official release. So it would either come, but I mean the ultimate vision is that that stuff would come whether it was in the final version or not. And so, but if I were to say, if I were to just give a number, I don't know. Like if I was able to work, I guess that's another thing too, is that I can kind of work on the game full time, but I do have to do other things, right? So, but if I was able to do the game full time, I would say I could have like that perfect escape version in less than a year, right? And so that, I would hope somewhere around there.
Okay. There is the other mode which we played, which is the developer sandbox, which I mean, that was really fun as well. I think you mentioned that was actually for you guys developing the game to test things out, but then you ended up opening it to the public.
Yeah. So if you do get a chance to try the game, there also we should mention there is a free demo available as well, and the dev room is in the demo.
Oh, cool.
And yeah, I want to just get people to be able to kind of just get a real feel for it, and just really, enjoy that. I want people, if they buy the game, I want them to know what they're getting, and I want them to be happy. And so, okay. So we created this dev room, which is basically a place where, and most games have this, but it's not necessarily accessible to the public, where the developers can go in and they can just spawn as many of any item or NPC or vehicle into this kind of big open, almost like Matrix void type world. And so if you want to spawn like 1,000, zombies or aliens, you could just do that and just chaos happens. Or you could spawn in like 100 cars and have them just flying everywhere, or whatever you want to do. And whenever we would test the game with our friends, we would always bring them in there first. And it always ended up that us and our friends would spend more than like an hour just in there, just messing around with all the guns and all the toys and the vehicles and just all, just mess. You can fly helicopters, do all these things, and that ends up becoming the game for like at least like an hour, if not more. And so it was like, why take that away from people who actually purchase the game when we know that you can have so much fun in there? And so like I think that was really the inspiration for it. It was just like, we have fun doing it, so why wouldn't other people? And we've seen a lot of streamers go pretty crazy in there. It's cool.
Yeah, so there's like a Ferris wheel. There's all the vehicles. You can go through the like loop the loop. Like there's a racetrack. You can just spawn loads of barrels. You can spawn all the guns are there, all the attachments are there. You can spawn enemies. There's a lot to do in that sandbox. And it was really fun. We did have a good laugh in the sandbox. At what point did you decide that you wanted to add that to the main experience? Was it just one day you were playing with your mates and you were like, I think maybe we should just put it in the full game?
We decided to put the dev room into the game very early on in the development. We had a working version of the escape mode with the open world, actually previous to even developing the dev room. So like we had like I would say a very limited prototype of the actual game. Then the dev room came a little later. This is all pre-release. This is before the early access. This is, but we did what was called the Steam playtest back about a year and a half, about a year before the early access release. And I think sorry. Yeah, so even when we had a working prototype of the escape mode, it was extremely early on, like during the playtest era of the game, which was about 2 years ago. We just realized like it's just so much fun, and plus, having a little bit of extra content in there never hurts, especially when you're that early in development. Just giving people things to do. But regardless, it just was something that it just seemed like the right thing to do because people had so much fun in it, and I wonder if I think that attitude comes from maybe like that YouTuber background.
Yeah.
Where it's like when in YouTube, like you always try to get the most out of your content, right? So it's like you film your little short film or whatever, but then you make another YouTube video out of like the behind the bloopers or whatever, the outtakes and stuff like that, because you're always just, where can I get more content, and so I'm sure it probably comes a little bit from that, but again, it's just, I just want people to have the most fun possible.
Yeah, so it's quite an amazing journey you've had. So like the film industry stuff, and then teaching yourself how to make the games, and then the Stonehenge game being so popular, and then the game before the pandemic, and now Alien Dawn. It's a bit of a crazy journey. If you were like 16 years old again, and someone told you that all this would happen, what would you say to them?
Yeah, it's a good question. I know. I never knew I was going to make an arcade game. I never knew I was going to make a museum exhibit. Certainly. Well, okay. I could have maybe believed if you said I was going to make a VR game. I could have believed that because I remember being like 17, 18 years old and like sitting out, like watching the sun come up or something, and like just like thinking about like the future, and just being like, man, like when virtual reality comes out, because I was into computers like very early on, right?
Yeah.
And it was like when virtual reality like comes out, like I think like there's gonna be this like legit like question of like, if you could do whatever you want in there, like why would you want to come out, right? Like why would you? And I remember thinking that all the way back then. And so I always had like for decades I've had this like, what is it going to be like, and even back in high school I like I said, like I mentioned, I made Quake 2 mods, and I made this mod called Virtual Reality High School where I remodeled my whole high school in the Quake 2 engine. And so like virtual reality has always been this like weird passion, even though like I kind of put all the development stuff aside for a decade,
Yeah.
And so so I believe the VR, I believe the Alien Dawn stuff, but I don't know if I'd believe the the museum or arcade game.
Yeah, it's a crazy journey. There's actually, I know for a fact, there's a few people that have just got into kind of developing games, or they're thinking about getting into game development. What words of encouragement would you give to anyone who's actually aspiring to get into game development?
I'd be happy to. It's interesting, because we go through difficult times ourselves. Even though, like, obviously I'm giving you the Instagram filter version of my story, right? And so, we go through hard times ourselves, and sometimes you can see these things that people say, inspirational stuff on social media, and you can go like, get out of here, like, hey, whatever. And then other times, like, you hear it and you're like, no, I actually needed to hear that today, right? And so, no, I'm happy to offer my perspective. I guess like the first thing that I would say is that I think it's important to put like certain things in perspective, because when I say like, okay, yeah, I learned Unreal in 3 months, and then within 6 months, the thing that I made, 9 months really, the thing that I made after learning Unreal was in a museum, right? Like, it's like, okay, that's true, but I also had like more than a decade of professional experience in, creating video content, directing, writing, editing, doing sound design, visual effects. So a lot of like the visual effects work that I would do, like for the movies and stuff, like
Yes.
in After Effects and, Maya or whatever it might have been, a lot of that stuff translated over to making Stonehenge, right? Like where it's like, I know how to create a vibe, right? So like when you arrive at Stonehenge, you're on this like really like kind of this cool, I'm very into like vintage stuff. So like you're there on this like kind of 90s looking like VR platform thing that takes you in to the monument. But like there's this like really like gorgeous music and the wind is blowing or whatever. And it's like that is stuff that I knew how to do from filmmaking.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And then I just applied like the very limited programming knowledge I had at the time to creating that feeling. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is like, you can't take my story and be like, I'm going to do something in 3 months and then it's going to fucking be in a museum or whatever. Right. Like, cause a lot of shit came before that.
Oh, really? That was my plan. I thought after talking to you, I could just release a game.
Yeah. I'm actually going to make a book called, Design a Museum Exhibit in 3 months from scratch. And
I'll pre-order it here, guys. Links in the description.
In a museum in 3 months.
Yeah, don't forget my affiliate link that I'm on my cut to.
For sure. Yeah. I'll definitely give you an affiliate link. So that's going to be my new book. Yeah, that's okay. So the other bits like that pop into my head is the like it's like there is this element of like knowing that whatever you're doing, like you might have success like very quickly. Some people do, right? Like I've met a lot of people that have quick success to where they can't even explain how they did it.
Yeah.
And that's great, right? If you're one of those people, that has its own caveats as well. Mm-hmm. Because you start off successful and you think everything you do is going to be gold. And then when it's not, a lot of those people really have a hard time recovering. Like you see it happen a lot to athletes and stuff like that are like, I won the state championship and then I won the national championship in college and then I got to NFL and I lost and now I'm crumbling or whatever, right? Like that story plays out like in many industries or, roles. So anyway, even if you have early success, like that can be great, but like you still got to be prepared for like the lows essentially.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, I guess it's kind of like up to you to decide, like, do you want to go through like long periods of difficult moments, whether it's like financially, emotionally, affecting relationships and families and all that stuff. And that's not just me, right? Like you watch any movie about like anybody that tries to do anything, it affects their life, and so it's like, if you really want to be like, you have to be ready for the lows as well as the highs. And but at the same time, here's the other thing is, I talk to the people that have made all the safe choices, right? Like, I got the job I was supposed to get. I've been at it for 20 years, and fuck, am I bored as shit, right? Yeah. And so it's like, what life do you want, right? Like, do you want that one where you end up, where you're like, what could have been and what, all that kind of stuff, but I'm safe and I'm comfortable and I can pay my mortgage or whatever the F, whatever your safety meaning is. Mm-hmm. Or did you have this crazy adventure where you're, speaking in front of, hundreds of people at a museum that you have no business talking to, and doing all this wild stuff. And I value those moments, right? They're you know they're not all the time, but I that's what I value experiences, I guess. If we needed to break it down, right? Like
Sure.
I value like those moments in life where you go, oh, that was dope.
Yes.
And so it's like the more of those that I can have, like I feel like the better life I have. And so it's like, but that might not be somebody else's measure of like what a good life is or whatever, right? So I think it's just kind of like understanding like what it is. Yeah, I guess you think would be like a either an admirable or enviable life, I guess, in it, to put it like, I suppose philosophically, if you will. I mean, we don't need to put that much thought into it, but I mean, I guess you do. It's your life.
Yeah. I get what you're saying though. Yeah, because what one person thinks of success, someone else might think something different. Depends what your values are as well in life. So it's totally different, isn't it?
Yeah, and so okay, and so really just to kind of put a more constructive button on it and not just be so like up my own ass about the philosophical side of it, it's just simply like I could have quit a billion freaking times.
Yeah.
At what at just like I could have quit like when I got frustrated, not understanding Unreal early on. I could have quit when like the museum backed out at the last second. We had everything ready to go.
Yeah.
The deal was supposed to be done, and they called us up and they're like, we changed our mind. And luckily I was able to figure out a way to make them change their mind again. Right. But I mean, you go like we spent 2 years making an arcade game.
Yeah.
Only to have it sit on my shelf on a hard drive behind me.
Yeah.
In real life. Not here, in real life. And, so it's like I could have been like, well, I guess VR is just not for me or whatever, right? And so it's like even with as cool as like some of these things sound, it's like there's always these really freaking challenging things. And I would imagine that most people go through them. Like that is what I think it separates like the people that probably are successful at trying to do something, and those that end up kind of maybe choosing whatever the other path, right? And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because again, it's about what I don't shame people for that, because it's like it might not be what you desire, right? So it's like you don't have to do it that way. Like I think it could be. I almost envy some of the like people that have like more safe positions sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of people do, actually. So it's the grass is always greener, I suppose, right? Like, but there is one other thing that I wanted to I like it slipped my mind for a second that I wanted to say. I think. Oh yeah. Okay. I think. Do you want me to can I keep going for a second? Is this?
Yes.
Okay.
Go for it. It's fine.
Yeah. Well, like I think going back to like Alien Dawn and that philosophy or whatever of really like I take every single bit of information that people give me, and it like all processes into like the decision making of trying to make a great game that a lot of people will enjoy. And I think I'm able to do that only because I don't take the negativity like too seriously. And I think part of where that probably comes from is that whole idea of like, I don't think I ever meant to do this in the first place. So I don't have like that, like, oh, well, I'm the artist. I know better than you do.
Yes.
That kind of attitude. And listen, hey, if you want to be that way, by all means, go for it. Right.
Yes.
But
yeah.
I know that there is gold in that shit.
Yeah.
Right. Like, it's about get the best out of, get the most out of everything, even the negative shit. And so that means you gotta set the ego aside,
Yes.
And so I think that's another. I mean, you can read more about it in my book, How to Get Your Artwork in a Museum in 3 months.
Yes.
But that's but that's kind of like, I guess, if I could go on, like I said, for hours, but that's kind of, I guess, a baseline.
Yes, no, it's really good that you have that approach to it, because there are some developers that are the opposite. Let's just say I've dealt with some people and they're just like, they get abusive because you say something, about their game, which is just constructive criticism. And I've had all kinds. I'm not going to get into it now, but it's quite funny. We'll say that for another day. Christian, it's been really cool having you on and speaking to you. Great insight into VR game development, and your story is amazing. How you kind of went from making modding games and making your high school in the Doom engine. Was it Doom 2?
It was Wolfenstein to Doom to Quake 2.
Yeah, and then obviously
now to Unreal 4 and now Unreal 5. So there's a little gap.
Yeah, I mean, all of your links I'm going to put down below, all your socials and all your different channels and Discord. Really appreciate you coming on, mate. It's been great talking to you.
This has been awesome. I truly just appreciate you having the thought and care to interview me and ask me these questions. Also, like, what you do for the indie, like the fact that you focus on indie game development is so meaningful to me, and I hope other people out there are appreciating it is what you do. And I also want to say too, just quickly, that like there's a lot of people that have helped me along the way to do what I'm doing. I have not done it alone, and so thank you to those people as well. But thank you for having me.
My pleasure. I love doing this. It's great. We're gonna have I've got plenty of other guests lined up for 2023. So yeah, guys, if you enjoyed the content, consider subscribing, like the video, join my Discord. We have all kinds of fun things going on my Discord as well, like game giveaways and things like that. Anything else you'd like to add before we depart, sir?
I feel like any conversation you and I start, we're going to be here for another 3 hours. What people don't know is that this is the second time we've filmed this. The first time we started and ended up talking and running around Neos for 3 hours, and we were too exhausted by the end of it that we couldn't even do the podcast. So I'm glad we were able to do it a second time and get it right this time. So I'm gonna not add anything, because I know we're just gonna have too much fun together. So
okay, mate. Great. Listen, it's been great fun, and thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you in the next one.
Bye everybody. Thank you.